Montana Territory, May 1871. The wagon ruts were still fresh when Loretta Ellsworth stepped down from the porch, her baby boy crying in her arms, and her husband already gone along with the horses, the money, and every scrap of food in the root cellar. He had taken everything but the baby. Loretta stood barefoot in the dust, wind lifting strands of her dark hair, her nightdress clinging to her knees. The horizon stretched empty, just pine, sky, and the sound of her child's cries echoing into it. She did not cry. She did not scream. She just turned, went back inside the cabin, and shut the door. By nightfall, the baby Orrin was feverish. She held him against her chest, rocking by the dying hearth. The firewood had run low 2 days ago. Loretta laid her shawl over him, then peeled off her own dress to wrap around his legs. She kept whispering to him, "You will not die, not you." The next morning, she wrapped Orrin tight and walked. She left the cabin, the ridge, and the trail behind her. The sun rose high, and she kept walking, her arms aching, feet bleeding, mouth dry. When the wind picked up cold and sharp from the north, she stopped in a patch of prairie grass and held her baby close, shielding him with her body. She did not know how long she had been walking when the sound of hooves reached her ears. A single rider came out of the trees, leading a packhorse. His hat shaded his face, but the rifle on his back and the trail dust down his shirt marked him for what he was, a cowboy, likely headed for one of the ranches near the Muscle Shell. He slowed when he saw her. "Madam," Loretta turned her body, shielding Orrin. "We do not want trouble." "I am not looking to give it," he said, easing off his horse. "You look half dead." She nearly collapsed when her knees buckled, but he caught her before she hit the ground. His hands were rough but careful, his voice steady. "Name is Osiah Reddin," he said. "You are safe now." She did not believe him, but she was too tired to argue. He carried her to the shade, gave her water from his canteen, and checked the baby with gentle fingers. "He is hot. He needs rest. You both do." Loretta's voice cracked. "My husband left us, took everything. I do not have anywhere to go." Osiah's jaw tightened. He looked down at the child, then at her. "You do now." He lifted her onto his horse and took the reins, walking beside them as they moved west. By dusk, they came to a small ranch tucked into the hills. A simple place, one barn, one house, one man. He helped her down, then led her inside. It was warm with the smell of coffee and old pine. He laid her on the cot in the corner and took the baby into his arms, wrapping Orrin in the last blanket from his trunk. "I will sleep on the floor," he said. "You and the boy take the bed." Loretta opened her mouth, but the words would not come. She just nodded. In the morning, she woke to the sound of coffee brewing and Orrin sleeping peacefully beside her, his fever broken. Osiah was outside, chopping wood with his shirt sleeves rolled up and steam rising from the kettle beside the fire. She stepped out, arms crossed tight. "You gave us your blanket." He looked at her with a small nod. "Did not seem right, keeping it to myself with a baby turning blue." "I did not ask you to rescue us. You did not have to." They stood in silence, wind sweeping through the grass. Then Loretta said, "I will work. I will earn our keep." Osiah's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I believe you." She cleaned the house, washed dishes, helped tend the chickens. He taught her how to swing the axe without bruising her palms. In the evenings, he read aloud from a worn book while she rocked Orrin in her arms. For the first week, they barely spoke of anything beyond chores. But one night, while he stitched the shoulder of his coat by lantern light, she asked, "Why did you help me?" He looked up. "Because when I saw you out there, I knew what that kind of alone looks like." Loretta swallowed hard. "You have lost someone too, my sister. Winter of '68. We were crossing into Wyoming. She got sick. I could not get her warm enough in time." She stepped closer, voice quiet. "I am sorry." He shook his head. "You kept your boy alive. That is what matters." Days bled into weeks. She found herself watching the way he brushed wood shavings from the floor, how he always poured her the first cup of coffee. He never asked for anything, never tried to touch her, but he looked at her like she mattered. And one morning, while she was hanging the wash, he came up behind her and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She turned, startled. "I am not expecting anything," he said quickly. I like seeing you smile." She did not smile often, but she did then. That night, after Orrin was asleep, she stood on the porch beside him. You gave me more than a place, she said. You gave me hope. He looked at her, the stars reflecting in his eyes. You gave me something too, a reason to come home at the end of the day. She reached out, took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, slow and steady. Neither of them pulled away. By late June, the cottonwoods along the creek were leafed out full and green, and the land had settled into its long stretch of warm days and slow evenings. Osiah worked the fence line most mornings while Loretta tended to the vegetable patch behind the barn. The soil was rocky, stubborn, but she dug her hands in anyway, coaxing rows of beans to start. Orrin lay swaddled in a woven basket beside her, shaded by a bent pine branch she'd rigged with a feed sack. She hadn't asked Osiah for seeds. She'd just used what she found in a tin tucked behind old tools in the shed. He never said a word about it, only walked past one morning and offered her a short-handled hoe he'd sharpened the night before. "Handle's ash," he said without looking at her. "Won't split easy." She took it. "Thank you." That was all. Evenings brought a quieter rhythm. After supper, Loretta stitched patches onto Osiah's worn work shirt while he shaved cedar slats down to build a cradle. Orrin had nearly outgrown the basket, his legs starting to kick against the edges. One night while she hemmed the sleeves of a dress she hadn't worn in months, Loretta asked, "You ever think of leaving this place?" Osiah didn't look up from the cradle's side rail. "I did once. After the winter my sister passed. Thought I'd ride south, maybe down into the Utah settlements." "Why didn't you?" He set the draw knife aside. "Got this land cheap from a man who couldn't make it hold cattle. Figured if I could keep the roof from falling in, I'd stay." "Has it ever felt like enough?" He rubbed his thumb along a knot in the wood. "Does now." They didn't speak after that, but the silence felt full, not empty. By early July, the first of the beans had sprouted thick and green. Loretta knelt beside them, sun on her shoulders, when she heard hoofbeats coming fast from the east. She stood, dusting her hands, just as Osiah stepped out of the barn and reached for the rifle leaning by the door. A rider crested the ridge, a young man with a torn sleeve and one boot missing. He looked wild-eyed and near broken with thirst. "Storm took out the bridge at Cold Creek," he shouted. "Flood split the trail, 2 wagons stuck and a baby drowned." Osiah didn't hesitate. He swung into the saddle, rifle slung behind him. "I'm coming too," Loretta said, already gathering Orrin from the porch. "You can't bring the baby into that," he said, voice low. "I'll stay back from the water. But I can help with the wounded." They rode hard, Osiah in front, Loretta behind on the packhorse, Orrin strapped close to her chest beneath a wool wrap. The trail had turned to muck in places, and trees had snapped clean where the floodwater had clawed through. By the time they reached the washout, the creek had carved a new channel, swallowing part of the trail and pinning a wagon against the rocks. A woman stood waist-deep in the current, holding a soaked blanket and sobbing. Loretta handed Orrin to an older man with a steady grip and stepped into the water alongside Osiah. She didn't flinch at the cold or the pull of the current. Her eyes were on the woman, and her voice didn't waver. "What's your name?" "Clara," the woman choked. "You're not alone, Clara," Loretta said. "We're going to get you out." Osiah tied a rope around his waist, anchored it to a tree, and moved into the strongest part of the current. Loretta held Clara's hand as they pulled both women back to dry ground. They worked until dusk, until the last of the injured had been lifted onto wagons and the water's roar had dulled to a quieter rush. Later, by a fire built from wet kindling and stubborn flint, Loretta sat cross-legged with a child's head on her lap, smoothing the girl's tangled hair. Osiah was tending a split ankle by lantern light, his hands steady despite the chill in the air. When the girl's mother came to reclaim her, Loretta stood and walked toward the edge of the camp where Osiah sat alone, wrapping a cut on his forearm. "You didn't have to do this," she said. He looked up, his eyes catching the last of the firelight. "Neither did you." Loretta knelt beside him, her hands resting on her knees. "I couldn't stay behind, not after what we've lived through." "You never do stay behind," he said, quieter now. "You don't turn from pain. You walk straight into it." She studied his face lined with dust, eyes shadowed, mouth drawn. "Maybe it's because I've known what it feels like to be left in it." He reached out then, not hurried, not unsure, and brushed his hand against hers. "Come back inside the firelight," he said. "It's cold." She rose with him, letting his hand hold hers just a little longer this time, and in that small clearing where strangers had become survivors and the sky turned black with stars, Loretta felt the edge of something solid beneath her feet. Not just safety, not just gratitude. Something else. Something growing. The wind began to shift by mid-July, bringing the scent of pine sap and the sharp tang of distant smoke from someone else's cookfire far off. Loretta stood by the barn with a bucket of water and Orrin balanced on her hip, watching Osiah mend the gate latch with one knee braced against the post. His shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat, and she noticed a tear along the shoulder seam she hadn't stitched yet. "When you're through, hand me that shirt," she said. He glanced over, then nodded once. "You sure you're up for more mending after last night? If I wasn't, I'd have kept my mouth shut." He gave a low chuckle but said nothing else, just passed her the shirt and went back to the hammer. Inside, she set Orrin in the cradle Osiah had finished last week oak, smooth to a dull shine, no nails, just wooden pegs and care. The baby's head turned toward the window light, small hand curling near his cheek. Loretta traced the tear in the fabric between her fingers, then threaded her needle. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, they sat outside near the fire pit Osiah had dug beside the porch. He filled 2 tin plates with roasted rabbit and beans Loretta had seasoned with wild onion, and they ate in the hush of dusk, the only sound the brush of wind through dry grass. After a while, she asked, "You ever think of building onto the house?" He chewed slowly, then swallowed. "Suppose I'd thought about closing in the lean-to, maybe adding a second room." "For what?" He looked at her then, eyes steady. "You tell me." Loretta lowered her gaze. "Hard to say. I've never had anything that felt like it might last long enough to grow." Osiah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "That's all I want now, something that holds." The fire cracked once, sharp in the quiet. She set her plate down and wrapped her arms around her knees. "When I left Missouri, I thought I'd found that. My husband talked pretty, made promises. But once the land turned hard, he stopped looking me in the eye." Osiah's voice stayed low. "A man who runs from hardship was never meant to lead anyone through it." She didn't answer right away. "Then do you believe people can change?" "I believe some folks never get taught how to stay, but I also believe others don't need teaching." Loretta turned her head. "Which are you?" He didn't smile, but something softened in his face. "I've been standing still for nearly 4 years. Just waiting for the right reason." They sat until the fire burned low. When she rose to take Orrin inside, Osiah followed, pausing in the doorway. "I'll sleep out in the barn tonight, give you both space." She caught his sleeve. "You don't have to." He looked down at her hand, then met her eyes. "I know." Then he stepped back, giving her a choice. That night, she didn't sleep much. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters, but Orrin stayed warm in the cradle, breathing soft and even. Loretta lay on the cot, eyes open, watching the moonlight shift across the rafters. She thought of the first night she'd arrived, how her limbs had felt like hollow branches, how Osiah had handed over his blanket without a word. She rose just before dawn, pulled her shawl around her shoulders, and stepped onto the porch. The sky was still dark, stars fading slow as the world turned. She crossed the yard barefoot, the grass cool with dew, and opened the barn door. Osiah was sitting against a hay bale, half asleep, rifle resting beside him. He blinked as she entered, brushing straw from his sleeve. "Something wrong?" he asked. She didn't speak. Instead, she knelt in front of him, careful and quiet, and reached for his hand. He took it, fingers warm and calloused and sure. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said. He didn't pull her into his arms or kiss her mouth. He just rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes, like he'd been holding his breath for weeks and could finally let it go. Outside, the first light broke over the hills, and the world kept on turning. August settled warm and thick across the hills, the kind of heat that slowed everything down to a quiet hush. Locusts hummed in the grass, and the cattle Osiah had traded for back in June grazed slow along the edge of the far field. Loretta stood at the stove, stirring cornmeal into a pot, her hair twisted off her neck to keep from sweating through her blouse. Orrin, now sitting up on his own, slapped his palm against the wooden floor and babbled to no one in particular. Osiah stepped inside with the sound of boots on pine, carrying a sack over one shoulder and a trail of dust behind him. "I saw Jasper down at the post road," he said. "He's heading north through the Judith Basin, offered to bring supplies if we've got a list." Loretta wiped her hands on her apron. "We could use lamp oil and calico if there's any worth stitching." Osiah set the sack down gently. "He said Mrs. Hanlon's been asking after you." She raised her brow. "I haven't seen her since the flood. Said she never forgot what you did for Clara." Loretta turned back to the pot. "I only did what I could. She's offering to pay for you to come down once a week, help with her youngest. Girl's got a bad hip from a fall last winter, needs steady hands." Loretta kept stirring, but her shoulders tensed. "You think I should? I think you'd do good there." "And it's your choice." She let the spoon rest. "If I go, Orrin comes with me." Osiah nodded. "Of course." That night, after the dishes were done and the porch cooled enough to sit without sweating, Loretta leaned against the railing, watching the moon rise pale over the ridge. Osiah joined her with a tin mug in hand, the contents still steaming faint. "I don't know how to be gone from here," she said. "Even just a day, you'd be coming back. You sure of that?" He looked over at her, not smiling, not trying to make it easier. "I know what it feels like to lose something you didn't think you'd ever have. I'd never ask you to stay if your heart wasn't in it." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I've been thinking about putting up shelves in the back room." Osiah took a sip from his mug. "That room's never had much use. It might if we need a place for books, or a cradle once Orrin outgrows the one you built." He turned toward her fully. "You thinking about staying?" "I'm thinking about building." The air between them went still, and then he reached into his pocket and brought out a small folded square of blue cloth. "I found this down by the dry creek bed. It's not much, but I thought maybe you'd use it for something." She unfolded it slowly. The fabric was faded but strong and soft at the corners. "This would make a good bonnet lining." "I hoped it might." Loretta looked up at him. "You keep giving things you don't have to." He leaned his forearms on the railing beside her. "I'm not giving them away. I'm handing them to the person who makes them mean something." From inside, Orrin let out a soft cry. Loretta rose to go, but paused at the door. "Come sit with us," she said. Osiah followed her in, settling beside the cradle while Loretta lifted her son and rocked him gently. The baby settled quick, one hand tucked beneath his chin. Osiah reached out, brushing one finger along the edge of the cradle he'd made. "I didn't think I'd ever be part of something like this," he said. Loretta whispered, "Neither did I." He met her eyes in the lantern glow. "But you want to be." She didn't hesitate. "I already am." He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't just hold it. She leaned into his side, her head resting just beneath his shoulder. Outside, the wind passed through the grass like a hush, and the house, small, patched, still standing, held steady against the night. The first frost came early that year. Not sharp enough to stay, but enough to turn the air brittle and silver the tops of the fence posts. Loretta stood in the doorway of the house, wrapping Orrin in a thick shawl before stepping out. She paused, scanning the sky. The clouds had that high, stretched look that promised colder days ahead. Across the yard, Osiah was oiling the hinges on the barn doors, crouched low with a rag in one hand. She crossed the yard to where he worked, boots crunching over the half-frozen grass. "You'll wear out that hinge before winter even gets here," she said, crouching beside him. He looked up, wiping his hands on his trousers. "It's already catching in the morning. Figured I'd rather fix it now than pry it loose when the snow's up to our knees." She shifted Orrin on her hip. "I think we've got 2 weeks, maybe 3, before the ground hardens for good." "I thought the same, which is why I've been meaning to ask." He hesitated, then stood. "When you picture the years ahead, do you see them here?" Loretta narrowed her eyes against the wind. "I do. With me." She didn't break his gaze. "I wouldn't be here otherwise." Osiah reached out, brushing a bit of straw from the shawl near Orrin's shoulder. "Then maybe it's time we stop circling around it." She tilted her head. "Around what?" "I want to marry you, Loretta." She didn't answer at first. The wind picked up, and somewhere in the trees behind the barn, a hawk called out over the land. "I never thought I'd want that again," she said finally. "I'm not him. I know, she said. That's why I'm saying yes. Osiah's face gentled, and he let out a breath like he'd been holding it for weeks. He stepped closer, taking Orrin's hand in his fingers. The child gripped his thumb, strong and certain. We'll say our vows before the ground freezes, she said. I want to begin all of it with the first snow. They were married 2 weeks later, under a stand of firs where the creek bent wide. Mrs. Hanlon came with her youngest, and Jasper rode in from the basin with a fresh-cut pine box filled with preserves and cloth scraps for Orrin's winter things. Clara, now walking easier with a cane Osiah had carved, brought wildflowers bound in twine. Osiah wore his cleanest shirt, the one Loretta had mended. She wore the blue calico he'd traded for, stitched into a simple dress with a line of glass buttons down the back. She walked barefoot through the frost-hardened grass, holding Orrin against her chest. I didn't write vows, Osiah said when the moment came, but I'll speak plain. He looked at her, eyes steady. I'll stand beside you in every season. I'll keep this land and you and the boy safe as I can. I won't leave, not for drought, not for cold, not for fear. Loretta nodded once, her voice strong when it came. I'll build this life with you, piece by piece. I'll walk forward, never back. And I'll love you without asking to be rescued. They sealed it with joined hands and a kiss that tasted clean, like the cold wind and pine needles underfoot. Through that winter, they kept the fire fed and the roof tight. Loretta took in sewing from neighbors spread miles apart, and Osiah bartered firewood for flour. When the snow piled high outside, they read aloud by lamplight, Orrin giggling from his place on a wool blanket beside the hearth. By spring, the back room held shelves lined with dried herbs and books passed between hands across the territory. The cradle was passed on to Clara's family, and Osiah began carving a child's bed from cottonwood. One morning, Loretta stepped out to the porch with a hand pressed low over her belly. Osiah looked up from where he was mending a harness. She didn't speak, just smiled. He dropped the leather strap and crossed the yard in 3 strides, lifting her hand in his. Another one, he asked, voice hoarse. She nodded. Come winter, we'll be 4. He kissed her then, full and certain, the kind of kiss that settled into the bones years past. The house grew, one room at a time. Children's voices echoed through the hills, and the fences held through storm and thaw. Loretta's sewing table always had an extra chair pulled close, and Osiah's tools never went long without use. They got old together, in the slow, quiet way that feels like coming home again and again. And through it all, their hands stayed laced weathered, warm, and sure.